And welcome everyone. And I thank you for joining us as well. Today I'm privileged to have the opportunity to talk to you about the adoption of AI-powered coding assistant. And this is more, as Kobis mentioned, from a mobile perspective, right? So contextualizing it in mobile development. And when it comes to mobile development, the mostly used IDEs are actually Xcode and Android Studio. And when we look at the adoption of AI, right now, in the next 5 to 10 years, and in my belief, AI will still be the topic of the technical sector. And AI adoption is already spread across into several sectors, from law to finance to software development. And when it comes to software development, one particular area where adoption is to be considered is the adoption of AI-powered coding assistant. And if we have to adopt, we'll have to start by looking at what is the quality of a perfect AI coding assistant. It should seamlessly integrate with our IDE. It should be configurable to run both on-prem and on-device. It should offer the full control over the data. It should understand various nuances of the natural language, produce results timelessly, and produce always acceptable and reliable results. We all know that word of perfection doesn't exist. And should we then ask ourselves, well, if we can't get this perfect assistant, should we adopt or not? Well, we need to adopt, but we need to have an educated adoption. And I've came up with some pillars that can help us build that educated adoption. The first one of them is understanding the critical role of a coding assistant in the modern era of software development, clearing out some naive expectations, and understanding the undeniable benefits of smart coding assistant over traditional ones. I want you to hold on to that third one for a moment. We'll get back to it in a couple of slides and we'll unpack what is actually the benefits of the smart coding assistant over the traditional ones. And fourth, we need to consider and preserve the developer relevance in the mix of AI tools. And finally, my favorite one is my proposed 3A approach in the adoption. Let's kick off with the naive expectations. One misconception is to think of software as math and not software as a digital solution. In essence, the code we write gets transpiled into binary, which kind of can be compared to math, but the overall digital solution is actually not a math. It is an original piece of work that is crafted with a certain originality required. The second thing that can drive those naive expectations is the overall picture. When we look at an overall result produced by an AI tool, from a macro level, it looks correct. But on a micro level, when we start looking at the nitty-gritties, it could look that some of the aspects are incorrect. So AI is especially efficient at generating code that can look correct, but that might be subtly incorrect. Now, the intelligent task of fixing those erroneous subtleties is reserved to the developers. I mean, Kobus, let's hear from you. When you heard that, AI coding assistant had become a thing, did you feel like we have to be replaced? Did you feel like your job was at risk at some point?
Initially, as I'm going to be honest, it was a concern. And after about 10 minutes of using the first AI, I think it was ChatGPT free at that stage, I realized that exactly as you mentioned, like the thing, it produces output that looks correct, but you still need to understand the code. Still need to understand where there might be subtle problems that you still need to solve. And thinking that developers can quickly be replaced by AI is quite a narrow perception at the moment. There's still a lot of creativity in the realm, even with the AI chatbots doing as well as they do currently.
Yes, so we are still relevant. So the developer relevance is to be preserved. And just to give some context, coding assistant tools have been with us for a long time for now. I mean, maybe for those who are kind of coding in this era of AI would believe that we haven't used them. We've used coding assistant to generate models for service call, for API calls, I've used myself tools that generate boilerplate code for Viper architecture, for clean architecture. All those tools have served us well. And an experienced developer should not be spending time writing predictable code. Instead, we should leverage of search and focus on the solution. That's the one aspect. And the second aspect is, what is originality? You see a piece of result or even an image or picture produced by AI, you can believe that's originality. In fact, originality resides in the understanding of the various nuances and in producing the unpredictable with your own subjective experience. Now, if you look at AI, that factor is not there because you have the training model, which kind of influences and biases the result produced. So the human is still very much relevant. And one final thing is accountability. If we had to say AI only, who is accountable for the produced software? So the developer has to be the very sole custodian of the software they produce. But that's one thing. Let's think of the arrival of the autopilot in the aviation industry, for instance. The autopilot is there to serve, and most of the flight is flown on autopilot. But the tasks that require proper thinking and that are more of awareness of the context, such as landing and takeoff, today are still performed by the human. With that, then we go to our proposed approach. So I'm proposing a 3A approach in the adoption. The first A will be the assess. Now, in our assessment consideration, I want you to look at the various criteria when you are thinking of adopting an AI tool. Interpretability, explainability. So once you have validated all of this, then we should have an output in form of metrics that will be the input into our adapt and adopt. So 3A's: assess first, adapt and adopt. So here it's where we have to look at, is the tool interpretable? Do I have means of contesting the result? Is it transparent? Do I understand kind of the intended purpose, the use case? And finally, and more importantly, is what are the privacy and security considerations that are available to me? After that, then I'm moving to the adapt phase. In here, as I need to be able to make what I have fit in the existing. So put in place some strategy and governance, and skill development to understand the tool so that I can use it more efficiently. When I understand it, I can share with the other guys. And I should be further able to customize it and tune it. I need to consider what are the on-premise considerations. And the last thing that we want to do is to give developers 15 tools to use. So those tools need to seamlessly integrate to what we have. Hence, we're looking at these tools in the context of IDE. I wouldn't like to be coding in Xcode or Android Studio and prompting a tool in a separate kind of software. And we need to continue to monitor those up to the point where we can able to optimize them and continually keep with doing that in a feedback manner. Now, once we've kind of adapted it, we need to start adopting it. Now, the adoption has two perspectives. The first one is from a developer point of view. And the first and obvious one is kind of hardware considerations. If I'm going to use a tool, I need to understand what are the hardware requirements for that tool. Do I need 16 gig of RAM and so forth? And the second one, which is kind of a controversial one, is the knowledge consideration. We're thinking of AI as assistant, not as magician. And I'm going to unpack that. We need to ask ourselves a mental question. With ample time and resources, would I have been able to develop the AI-generated solution? So if I had all the resources and all the time, given a certain result produced by an AI tool, would I have been able to do it? If the answer is yes, yeah, by all means, then I'm well positioned to start using the tool. If the answer is no, I believe that it's important to have some follow-up questions in terms of identifying where the gaps are, and if it is a matter of experience, and this will inform me on what are the next steps for me. You see, going back to our analogy of the autopilot, on the journey of becoming a pilot, one first learns how to fly a plane and accumulate the required number of hours before qualifying for commercial flights. It's only later when you actually sit in the cockpit, tons and tons of hours later, then you are able to turn on that autopilot. You wouldn't like someone to go on the plane and first thing to do is autopilot to fly. And let's look at the adoption from a stakeholder perspective. Now, remember, our first A was the assess. And data sets should have produced a set of metrics. And those metrics could be quantitative and qualitative, should be then considered by the stakeholders. What is the completeness of what is produced, number of lines of code, accuracy, and what is the overall positive impact? And also, the stakeholders need to outweigh or balance out what are the benefits of the tool in terms of time and cost over the risk of exposing the intellectual property. A tool might be good, but if the risk of exposing your IP is way higher, I would say that might not be the one you opt for. Now, Kobus, looking at this triple A approach, what is your take on it?
I think it's something that you need to take into deep account when you're using any AI tool, right? As you've mentioned, sometimes we just look at how good is the code that it produces, and we don't think about the other considerations here. I think privacy and security considerations are some of the most important things that you need to remember when using an AI tool. Is you can very easily leak sensitive and private information without you knowing it. So that to me is almost the first thing to look at when start using an AI tool or an AI assistant, is look at the privacy and security considerations, and then start looking into going out from there from a capability perspective.
Yeah, kicking off with Apple, from Xcode 16 onwards, Apple has started releasing some smart coding assistant. And the first two that are supported at this moment is Code Completion and Swift Assist. Kicking off with Code Completion, it aims at boosting productivity using an on-device model, right? That is an important thing to kind of stress on. On-device here will translate to it being available regardless of you having internet connectivity or not. And it comes at a cost. Because it's on-device, your hardware should be powerful enough to handle the compute required for producing the expected results. Now, it is trained with the latest Swift SDK, and that is important to know in the manner that whatever gets released to you is first used to train the model before it gets released to you. So at any given time, what you have in code completion will always be in advance compared to what you know about the SDK. So you won't have any lag in terms of questioning it or asking for a prompt against something that it doesn't know. It gets trained first before the SDKs are released. Now, one interesting question was asked to Apple engineers: which code was used to train this model? And they haven't disclosed it. But the one thing they say, though, that the code that they use is the code that they're authorized to use, and the model is not trained on the developer's code. Now, what are the core features of code completion? It offers prediction for model properties, offers predictions for method signature. It can also assist with refactoring. Now, let's just talk about the first two. So this is a situation where you want to build a model, be it a class, an enum, or anything. You comment it out, giving some description of what the model should carry. And then code completion will offer you completion for all the properties with naming and even the data type. Now, when it comes to completing method signature, given a certain description of a method, code completion then will be able to complete the method, giving you the parameters, the name, the label, as well as the type. That's what you get with code completion. Now, on the Swift Assist side, the first thing you should kind of spot here is the cloud, which is different from what I had on my code completion, which means that this runs on the cloud. So with that, internet is required at all time. But it is a kind of a more powerful companion because it does not only just complete, it can also talk to you. You can actually interrogate it on further things, And it is built, though it is a cloud thing, it is built with a security mindset. It's seamlessly integrated with Xcode, and it also, as code completion, it is trained with the SDK before the SDK gets released to you. Now, to emphasize on what Apple declares around the privacy, the code is only used on request and never stored for servers. So your code is only used to process your request, but never stored past the time of your request. Now, in terms of the core features, ability to understand natural language. I've tried it in French. It can respond to me quite properly. And then it directly integrates with Swift. And then strong emphasis on the cloud with security considerations. Now, you can use it to refactor, to improve quality, to maintain the code, and to even explain what you find. Let's look at them in comparison. So Swift Assist and code completion. Internet is required for Swift Assist. because it runs on the cloud, and on code completion, you're actually working offline and any other thing. Faster results on code completion because it's processed locally, and then the latency of the wire takes long time on your Swift Assist side. Now, they will both help you and boost you, but every one of us has to consider which one can be used for the best productivity. Cobus, which one would you pick?
When I look at this table, one of the things that is important to me is the faster results. You don't want to sit and wait for cloud to think about something, give you a result, and then it's wrong. And if you start going into a loop there, it might be a bit of an issue. The other thing is understanding the context for code completion that it has is if it has local context about what you're already doing, what you're going, and you start using that for the method signatures and code completion to quickly just accelerate your development. That I think is going to be the most useful tool for most of your development lifecycle. Obviously, when you're creating new stuff, you're going to have to use Swift Assist if you're going to generate a bit new architecture and want to discuss how to do things better. But I think for day-to-day work, code completion is definitely going to be my way to go.
All right. I think you've made your choice there. Now, let's look at them from a security point of view. So we say that code completion runs locally. We know that what runs locally and does not leave your device is always safer. So from that perspective, code completion is way safer than Swift Assist. However, Apple built Swift Assist with a security and privacy mindset. With that, your code is never stored on the server and is not used to train the machine learning models. In terms of hardware, this is all Apple story, so we won't be speaking about any other device here. So you need a Mac, and then Mac OS 15 is required. For the chip, the M2 model is the one that is preferred, and you need a 16 gig of RAM. Now, let's see code completion in action. I'm going to kick off with the video. So in this context here, what I wanted to do is to build the login use case, which will encapsulate the logic attached to the authentication process. Here, I would like to authenticate using an email of any identifier with an associated password. So now code completion is already well aware of the context. So as soon as I've given my description in the comment there, code completion should actually take over and give me a completion automatically, which in this case I accept. So it was aware and it completed with a signature, making sure that the username and the password were all proposed to me as string. Now I'm going to implement it later. So I'll add a comment there. I'll say fine to do. At the later stage, I'll come and implement the actual code. Now, talking about the context awareness here, I want to ensure that it actually is aware of the context. So I'll go elsewhere, I create an authenticated request. So the aim there is to encapsulate the request in data that cannot change. So I want to keep the data that my UI receive as immutable as possible so that when it hits the domain, the data layer, it still preserves its integrity. So to do that, I need to encapsulate the username and the password inside the model. And that model will have to ensure that my properties are all invariant. So I would like for code completion to give me an implementation of this class or this tract in the way that the username and the email address are both invariant. Same thing applies with the password. Now, after having provided all my description, I kick off. Now I'm waiting for code completion to take over. It gives me a name and it gives me adherence to codable. Bam, it gives me again the awareness of identifier. And then now we're not done yet. Is he aware, or is code completion aware that I've created somewhere request? So I change my comment. I come here, I say now, I'm not only going to use the individual fields, I'm going to use my authenticate request. So I'm saying authenticate using the authentication request. I'm hoping that code completion has awareness of the context and will pull my authentication request and inject it in the suggestion that you make for my method signature in this case. Now I kick off, authenticate again. I'm hoping, yes, bam, it gets it, and it gives me the very same object that I created. So the context awareness here, Kobe said we're talking about, is cultural. It should. One thing that I would have wished, just to stop there for a moment, one thing I would have wished, though, is for it to kind of propose the object as well. As you see, the limitation is that it didn't go as far as creating that user object. So it's a reference to an unknown element. So that's it from the Xcode one. Switching quickly on Android journey, we're going to kick off with Gemini. And why Gemini? Because Gemini is the one that is closer to the Android SDK. Being owned and developed by Google makes it a language that does not have a lag in terms of features, compared to the Android and Kotlin SDKs. So what are the features of Gemini? Now, it understands natural language, generate code, look at resources. The one important thing that I want to draw your attention to is it is free, but it requires a Google account. So you will need to create a Google account. It runs on the cloud, and it is kind of similar. It is our Swift Assist counterpart. Now, there's a disclaimer on the freeness of the tool. So don't be surprised if in a couple of months from now, you are asked to pay, because this free is actually a very big disclaimer on it in limited countries and for the current period of time. Now, we also have a counterpart for code completion. It works seamlessly. The only difference here is the code completion in Gemini actually runs on the cloud as well. So it's not on device one. And it requires you to have an explicit consent before you can actually gather context. Remember, it's all about here the context what we're talking about. In terms of hardware requirement, now we can include the Windows guys, because we can do development for Android on Windows, Mac as well. So the requirement looks like we want a Windows 10 for Windows and 16 gig of RAM. And then the Mac requirements more similar. It's max core and 60 gig of RAM. Now let's see it in action. Let's kick off with code completion on Gemini. I'm gonna repeat the same exercise, and then we're gonna have kind of a side-by-side view with what we had just seen now with code completion on Xcode. So same thing, I create my login use case. Again, I bring my similar comment here, authenticate using username and password, and then I expect it to complete. But I'm sitting there chilling and hanging. Nothing happens. And guess why? Important thing here, first stop. So by default, code completion in Gemini doesn't come enabled. We've got 3 options, and for it to be able to give you any type of suggestion, you actually need to open. We're gonna debate on this later on, but I'm gonna grant here the permission. So get context from this project. Now, once that's done, then code completion should be able to read my entire code base. So I'll repeat the same exercise, authenticate, and then bam, it gives me the very same suggestion with the same field names and data type as well. Now, similarly, I'm not going to implement it right now. I'll add it to there, and I'm going to go to the model package and create my request object. As I mentioned earlier, the aim there is to encapsulate the data that is received by our UI layer into a model that preserves it so that it doesn't change sets as it propagates over from the UI layer all the way to the data layer when I hit our API service call. So that's the reason why we do encapsulate the request data into an object like this. And we want to ensure immutability of all the fields, because once received from the UI, nothing else should be able to change them. Same thing here, I'm defining my identifier, which could be a username and an email address, and of course, an associated password to any of these identifiers. And I'm expecting and hoping that code completion in Gemini will still give me a very similar structure. In this case, I will expect some val for both fields. So once I do that, and I get the same kind of result. Going back again to my method, and I kind of refactor my implementation, asking code completion, look, I'm going to authenticate now using my request and no longer using the individual fields. So I'm expecting that it will do. And I'm, again, trying to trick it, asking it for a user object, hoping that that user object will come to me. Again, it generates that. It is aware of the context. It brings the user request. And next stop here. One thing I want to highlight here, it didn't do the automatic import, which I would have expected. And again, the very same problem is our user object isn't created. So one limitation. Now, the response to that limitation then comes with Gemini. So here's our Gemini demo. To talk about Gemini demo, I want us to first look at the prompt that I have. So let's start by looking at the prompt. Again, remember the limitation of the first tools that we had is that they created the code, but there was one object that was never created, which was the user object. Here now I'm changing the approach. I'm telling Gemini, please give me generate an authenticate use class with a single authentication method. This method accepts an authentication request object while the authentication use case is located. I'm even giving precision in terms of where the packages should be. The authentication request model is represented by a data class, is in the model package. It contains the identifier and password fields, both of which are strings added to do for the implementation. The authentication request return a user object. And here, because I've been missing that guy so much, I'll go even further. And when we scroll down, I'll go even further and I say, here, please add for me that user object. So I'm asking it to create a user object as well. So let's see what Gemini would generate with this prompt. So I kind of complemented that lacking user object that was never created in Assist. So let's see. Gemini running on the cloud, again, has to go and interrogate the model and comes back. First stop, everything comes low. So let's look at our first stop and discuss the object that was generated. So the first object is the authentication request. So this, we had it before from the code completion already. So that is expected. Then the second one is what we didn't have before. It's basically some explanation of what had to happen. So it's explaining to me even the classes. But I'm going to go further and look at something in particular. And for those who are Android developers, they will understand exactly why a specific name was chosen for a certain method. And that's the execute method, which I want to bring here. So you see, the choice of the invoke name is not a random one. In clean architecture, a use case interactor is a domain layer entity that encapsulates the logic attached to a single operation. And one way of achieving that is to build the use case in a way that only one method is publicly available to the outer world. Now, the invoke method in Kotlin specifically takes this even further by allowing you to treat objects as functions. In other words, the use case object of this type can be called as a method. In this way, the generated code is not only serving as a reminder for best code practices, but also even for clean architecture. So this is the power of something like Gemini over the code completion, which is very much limited. Now, going back again to our video, and let's look at some other considerations. It's giving me a consideration to handle requests and errors. It's telling me here are some considerations you need to consider. Security, dependency injection. So this is the level of interactor you can have with code completion as opposed to just the traditional one that infers things from your comment. Now, Kobus, if you look at code completion in Gemini and you look at what we had in Xcode, how do you think they compare?
For me, let's talk about code completion first, just the normal code completion. I prefer the Xcode version. It's a bit more reactive, a bit more faster. It felt to me like it expanded a bit more with the exact same prompt, giving you a bit more safe code to run. Obviously, it didn't create the user, but I liked Xcode a bit more. However, this with Gemini, where you can talk to it, it's explaining to you some blind spots that you might have. I think that's quite amazing from a development experience. So if I have to use the full tool to get the full answer, not just code completion, I think Gemini is the way to go. Yeah.
Okay. Let's then go back to this slide. I think I did mention that we'll get back to the level of access you give to Gemini and even code completion in general. So you have 3 levels of context awareness. So there is use your context for all projects, ask me to decide per project, and don't use. So obviously, if you opt for the don't use, you don't get any code completion feature at all. Now, the choice is left between the first and the second one. I would advise to never use the first one, and we'll understand why in the following slides. So always go for the second option because you get prompted to choose on every single project whether or not you're allowing Gemini to have context of your code. If you go for the first one, what you are saying implicitly is any project open in Android Studio, Gemini have access to the code. So keep that in mind when we look at the security considerations. The one thing that you can use again, going back to our adapt phase, now start the second A, is the exclude list. So you can have an exclusion list where you can tell Gemini, look, I want you to have context of every single file but this one. So this will be like the forbidden fruits in the Eden. So you can actually list out an exclusions list. And then what I'm now starting to bring to your attention is those considerations that we all believe that were all clear, but maybe we didn't read them thoroughly. And I want us to kick off with the first one. Your feedback data, such as thumbs up and down signal, might be used to train Gemini. Keep that in mind. If you opt in for context awareness, now I'm pointing you back to the previous slide where I said you should never take the first option. This information collected, including code, may be used to improve our product services such as machine learning technology. So this justifies why I'm telling you guys, don't ever choose that first option. Always go for the second one. Now, even further, objectives for AI. They want to be accountable, which is a good thing. You know, we have that position where the tool manufacturers give us a chance to go and make them accountable of any tools. But remember, you've given content awareness, which means if you are building a compression algorithm better than Lemplziv that can bring the size of a file to 1/10,000 of its current size, the Google developers looking at your code, as they say, they might actually look at it, you know, and which means that your property and IP can actually be divulged without, you know, you getting a proper patent for it. Now, the other thing that I want to point you to is the last of the Google principle on our second column. Technology that cause harm or are likely to cause overall harm will not be pursued. So Google is saying that they won't be pursuing any technology that might be causing harm or they're likely to do so. But it does not stop there. It goes further. And that's a part that we don't read. Where there are or where there is a material risk of harm, we will proceed only where we believe that the benefits substantially outweigh the risk and we incorporate appropriate safety constraints. So in other words, it's not that they want, it is that there are situations, there are cases where Google might pursue a technology that might cause harm. So keep that in mind when you adopt a tool to kind of decide which level of information you give it and go and thoroughly read every single thing that is driving or governing the tool. Another one, let's go even further. The privacy notice of Gemini itself. So this is no longer Google. So we look at Google as a whole. Now let's look at Gemini as a subset. Now let's just talk about number 2 and number 3. It is not possible to delete upon request whatever data you've sent through. Well, that seems kind of plausible because the data is anonymized. So if it's anonymized, once you've sent it through, they can't even cross-reference it to you. That makes that sense. I'm okay with that one. The third one, to help with quality and improve our products, human reviewers may read, annotate, and process your prompt-generated output, related features, and feedback. Again, going back to your $1 million algorithm that you wanted to create can be read. And please do not include sensitive data. With these, is there an alternative? Maybe we should all consider some third-party alternatives. And why? Because being paid tools, they come with a lot more of customization and level of control over your data that you have in the traditional ones. Now, we don't have the full time to deep dive into GitHub Copilot. I mean, Kobus, if you're keen, I would like for us to come back in a few weeks' time to talk about Copilot in depth. But we're going to get a sneak peek of what we can achieve with Copilot. Now, developed by and owned by GitHub. And that's very intentional. I'm mentioning that so that you understand that it's not developed by the custodian of neither iOS Swift nor Android, which means that there might be a lag between what the model was trained with compared to what the SDK has as available features. So you might find yourself interrogating GitHub Copilot against a feature or something that is not yet aware of. So that is worth keeping in mind. It's got paid subscription. We'll look at the model quickly, and it's cloud-based, so it's all on the cloud, and it comes with a lot of privacy security considerations as well. As for availability, It's available on GitHub Mobile, Windows Terminal, through CLI, and to the website, as well as on GitHub repositories. So with that, here is the features that are currently available on both Xcode and Android Studio. So the Xcode version is still in preview for most of the features, but you still have code completion, and you have a multi-language support. You've got a multi-line suggestion, and you've got content filtering, which is very good. As I said, being a paid tool, it comes with a lot of consideration for security. And then you can even block suggesting, code from a public outer space. So if you say that I don't want to get any code that is living externally, for the risk of not plagiarizing anyone, so you can kind of customize that, and it's got a chat. So this is the mindset with which it was built. And even unpacking more on these privacy considerations, there's a policy management in place which help people manage policies, access management, to which you can decide who has access to what. You've got users data control. You can control how your data is used, and you can customize that. And audit log, to define the who, what, who, and when. So who did what at what time. And furthermore, it even offers the same thing of exclusion list, where you can also decide, don't include this in the training or in the context awareness. Now, is this available to everybody? No. Here is a table that summarizes some of the key differences in the different subscription models. So the first one is the individual one, and the business one and the enterprise one. So I'm going to point maybe on two important ones. So remember, my 3A approach is the assess, adopt, and adapt. So basically, my adapt is not available on the business and individual. So in my adapt is where we can fine tune the model. So this will fail my AAA approach. So we'll be able to assess, but we won't be able to adapt. Hence, it will be difficult for us to adopt. So the enterprise one looks more like the one that will fit in my AAA model. And then the other thing that is quite important is the audit log, which makes sense not to be available on individual one because you're the only one contributed to it anyway. Kobis, when you look at this, which kind of model would you suggest that a mid-sized company should adopt?
I would still go for the Copilot Enterprise version. The fine-tuning for your custom large language model is still quite important. The knowledge base that you get access to help you learn how to better use Copilot and actually get more bang for your buck is also very valuable. So it's a bit more expensive, but I think it's worth the expense.
Yeah, it's what 4 times. Okay, all right. I see the maths there, but as I said, we don't have the full time to look at Copilot. But I would not stop this preview of GitHub Copilot without actually looking at least a small short use case of it. Now, we've looked at GitHub Copilot, we looked at Swift Assist from a coder perspective, so a code generator perspective. But there is more to it. For me, the pinnacle of AI-powered tool is actually when we can use them as fellow developers and interrogate them to check sound ideas and offer us alternatives and even propose enhancement. Remember, I told you to hold on to one thought when I said the smart code assistant are way more than the traditional ones, which were only there to generate code. This is exactly where I want you now to bring that in mind and to see the full capacity of an AI-powered tool beyond just the traditional generate code for me. Now, in this case, what I wanted to do is to build a session manager. So I kind of had this prompt where I told GitHub Copilot, look, I need to build a session manager. My plan is to make it a singleton and track the session through a private variable carrying the token. And I would like to clear all session states on logout. And I'm asking GitHub Copilot, is this a good approach? Please make some suggestion and generate some code. Let's see how GitHub Copilot responded. So taking its time there and giving us some results. All right. So let's first start by looking at if it agrees with my approach or not. So first thing is GitHub Copilot tells me your approach to creating a session manager as a singleton and tracking the session via private variable is a good one. Here is a detailed plan. So it gives me first even a plan on how to craft the whole solution. So create a session manager, add a private variable, as well as implementing the logout method. So it uses the objects approach for singleton, and then it carries the session token through a private variable, and it provides me with getters and setters for my session variable. Let's see if it implemented the logout that I asked, because I wanted the states to be cleared on logout. Yes, it also clears out the states on logout. Now, as I said, I want you to see the full capacity. It doesn't stop here. So when you have a fellow developer, it's not about give me code. It's about, is it sound? Have I left something out? And I went even further. Then I added another prompt to follow up with this, where I'm asking GitHub Copilot, let's see as it types, are there some considerations that I've left out? What are other factors that will influence the current implementation? You see, when you build something, you might have a blind spot as one individual, but as a team, someone else might have a certain knowledge that you don't have. So, and this is the full-blown kind of extent to which we could use those tools. I'm using it as a fellow developer to sound check whatever reasoning I have. And let's see if it's found any blind spot to what I'd proposed initially. So let's give it time to respond to that. So I'm asking it if is any other consideration that I should kind of put so that this is an enterprise-like solution that can scale, secure, and can be robust over time. So the prompt has been entered and the results are coming out. So we'll let it complete and then we'll go through it. So first thing, okay, let's see what I've left out. So GitHub Copilot comes back with a list of things that I didn't consider initially. It says, firstly, is thread safety. Remember, being a singleton, it can be concurrently accessed by many other external entities, and that access might result, especially if it's a write operation, might result in data that is not atomically set. So it's telling me that I've left out some thread safetyness. Persistence. It's telling me that, look, it's good that you're carrying and tracking your variable through one private variable, but think about it. Your session will only persist on the session, on the launch. When the app restarts, that value will be lost. So maybe if you want to have a long-lived session, you might have to consider having a storage mechanism. Security, it's bringing me that I'm keeping this in the clear. And this is kind of a vulnerability that exposes my token, especially against a snapshot type of attack. Expiry, we know that session comes with a TTL, a time to leave. Then I didn't attach any of that to my session variable, which means that there could be a point where I'm using my session token while it's already been expired. So I should actually attach a TTL to that session, and eventually error handling. And what we love most, all of us, is testing. Serge, you didn't test. Right, you need test. So you see, already some things that I didn't think of. And he even proposed an updated plan, create this and do that. And let's see if it at least tried to give me some improved implementation of my own class, of the one that we had before. So we're going to look at the new implementation of the class. Okay, that's coming. There we go. So in this new implementation, as you can see, it didn't address all of these, but it addressed at least one thing. That's the concurrent access, so the thread safetyness. So using a reentrant lock, it provided synchronous access, be it on the get and on the set of my token. Beautiful. And it does it even on logout. So it already catered for one of the shortcomings that I didn't have. So the other 4 is for me to cater. So this is the extent of Copilot. Kobus, what do you think of this use of assistant tool as a rubber duck?
I think this is the future for development, especially if you get, if you're a bit more alone on a project. Rubber ducking is one of my favorite things to do, and I think it's very valuable as a developer that you can see your blind spots, as well as you can also, we're talking about blind spots, as the AI assistant might have blind spots as well. So you need to build that context. You saw Serge building that context, everyone. And I think that's quite important, is build the context for the AI assistant. It's not this magic, just generate AI anymore. It's not an AI generator. It's an AI assistant. I think this shows very valuable how good AI assistants can be to assist you with programming better and getting a better solution out there.
Thank you for that. In conclusion, You should always ensure that the AI tool you are using is interpretable, transparent, reliable, and that you can contest its results. As for stakeholders, please understand that coding assistants have been in the picture for a while and have served developers. AI assistant will just amplify the developer effort. So beware of saying that this tool will make them lazy and I should not have them. And also beware of naively believing that you could build your digital solutions without human. We've kept that the developer is still very much relevant. And always, always balance out the cost of the benefit of the risk, of using an AI before its adoption. Now, for us developers, I want to tell you one thing, guys, ladies and guys, we are here to stay. Yeah, because originality requires us, but adopt or be left behind. Just like computer literacy has become now a requirement, those of us who have some AI-powered knowledge will have competitive edge. We need always to evaluate, however, our readiness of using an AI tool and know when to use them. One particular category I want to challenge here is the group of juniors. The traditional juniors should redefine themselves. Why? Because the bulk of the mundane tasks are now delivered by AI tools. That's challenging for juniors. You need to redefine yourself. You can't be presenting yourself as that person that can carry on and carry out the mundane tasks because AI will come and deliver that. So I want the juniors to redefine themselves and to see how they fit in this space. Now, from a privacy security consideration, we need always to put in context the local regulation and the sensitivity of the data we're dealing with. We need to think of hardware if we are considering an on-device, or even consider on-premise alternative, and even better, consider paid alternatives, which are generally safer and offer more control over our data. Thank you for joining us, guys. We'll be taking questions.
Thanks, Serge. Yeah, let's start with the first chat. The first question from Kaylee Smith. I'm a UX designer and I've started learning and understanding code through AI coding tools like Xcode, V0, and Bolt.new. I'm interested in how to best use AI to code components design without logic for platforms like Storybook to improve speed, accuracy, and communication process between designer handoff and dev execution. I'd love your insights for someone looking to create a custom component with limited code knowledge.
That's a good use case. Because you are a designer, the intricacy of building code with all the best practices is not really your concern. Your concern is the functional aspects of a component, whether or not a response to the user need and a certain level of responsiveness, and it looks kind of elegant. So yes, Swift Assist is for you. I would say it's a matter of kind of narrating your prompt in a way that you are making Swift Assist aware that you are not really a developer. This is not from a developer perspective, but this is from a designer perspective. I think that's the adapt phase that I'm talking about as well. It's understand where to position your question. You see in that prompt that I had earlier on, where I said, please also add this. I'll say in your case, when you add your prompt, and always add, this is from a designer perspective, my primary considerations are user friendliness, or could be elegance, it could be this. And you see that the result that I produce will be focused on your usability over the code quality. Yes, of course.
If I can just expand on that, something that I think might be valuable from a designer perspective is remember the scaffolding and context that needs to be given. Something that might assist you to get better generated designs, also using the Figma tokens, like, listen, I'm using this type font, this is our color scheme and color palette. So giving that context to the AI tool that you're using at that time might also assist you for getting better designs going forward. We also have a question from Moses, two-parter. First off, as the industry begins to embrace the application of AI, could the use of AI code assistants increase the increase to the barrier of entry for developers, particularly for new junior devs, or could it make it easier for new developers to cross-skill, i.e. pick up new tech stacks?
Exactly. Very, very good question. And Moses touches to my last point when I was talking about in the conclusion, juniors have to redefine themselves. That's pretty much true. Uh, I think there's less risks for those of upper and higher seniority levels. I don't see a lot of threats on the leads senior level, but I see a substantial one on the junior level. And I want juniors to redefine themselves, because the traditional junior who was there to merely use what's existing and replicate it in other places. So we've done this here. Please, can you do it there? Will be out of space, because that can be done right now as we speak by AI tools. So that's a big kind of shift in the barrier. So the goalposts have shifted for a junior. A junior should be then firstly AI powered and consider what is the entry level skill sets that I should have that cannot be produced by an AI assistant tool. And juniors have to question themselves around that. What is the first package that I can bring as a junior that cannot be brought by AI tool? And I'm still thinking about that. That's why I'm saying they need to redefine themselves, because when I was writing this talk, I was like, what is then that subset that they need to come with? And being a mobile engineering leader, DVT, part of my role is kind of to provide those packages that define the seniority level. And I've been giving some thought to this. If AI is in the picture, what do I define as a junior? So it is a good and fundamental question, but the list of features or quality or skill sets that will form part of a good and acceptable junior is yet to be defined, because this is just starting. But this is our next step. We need to redefine our junior roles.
Awesome. Thanks, Serge. The second part is, could clients soon realize the cost effectiveness of embracing code assistance, as it could certainly promote lean team structures?
It is not as clear cut as that. Remember, as I said, we need to evaluate and balance out the advantage and the benefits of using the tool over the cost and the risk of exposing IP. So depending on what we're dealing with, if we're dealing with healthcare data, for instance, if there is even a small substitution of data being compromised, I would say AI should be off the table completely. If there's even that's the smallest doubt, that AI should be out of the picture, right? So we need to outweigh what is the benefit here and what is the risk of exposing our data. Remember, a lawsuit against a healthcare company, for instance, who would have exposed private data of health statuses could cost more than the price that was reduced by using an AI tool. I mean, if you're employing 10 developers, you say fine, they're becoming faster, let's say 2 times faster, and you are then hit by a lawsuit because you've exposed data. I believe the lawsuit cost will be way more than the value that the developer gains. So I believe it's not as clear cut as that. I think you need to understand what you're dealing with. And if you don't have an on-prem approach or an on-device approach, and the only thing that you have at your disposal is the cloud solution, and if you have a doubt and you're dealing with sensitive information, I'll say AI off the table.
Awesome. Thanks, Sage. Just to answer the last question that I see here, will this video be published online? Yes. I'm going to post it on our social media channels as well. You can also ask any questions there. I think LinkedIn is going to be the main place where it's going to be posted, but there is a couple of places where it will be posted. And for the more junior guys, if I can leave you with one last thought from my side, something that helped me in the beginning to get a bit more relaxed about AI is, I don't think AI will take your jobs, but engineers and developers who know how to use AI more effectively, that's where you need to be scared of. So definitely something need to take into consideration.
Thank you, Cobus.
Yeah, I think then that's it. I see something popped up in the Q&A tab. It's from Ashton. Great presentation. Do you think assistants will eventually make intermediates and senior devs do more work via prompting and evaluating responses and less coding out solutions on a daily basis?
Good one. So you see the prompting one, the rubber duck use case that we ran with GitHub Copilot. that's the type of job that I think kind of is of interest to most of us. Then that's the direction we should head. You've got an idea, you can bounce off, which means that you don't always have a need for a physical person to interact with and sound check what you believe the approach should be here. You have an interactive AI tool that is equally capable of giving you some insights to some extent. So yes, the developers more work. No, it's already what we do, but now we do it between fellow developers. With AI growing and becoming faster, I think we would do it with AI coding assistant. So it's already something that we do, but it just will require less human to get us with that solution that is proven, cross-referenced, and sound checked by fellow developers.
Awesome. Thanks, Serge. Yeah, I don't see any more questions. Yeah, Kieran did post something in the Q&A for the link to the events. Thank you very much. I think then that's it. Thank you very much, Serge, for all the info. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did as well. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for joining us, guys. Have a good one.
Cheers all.
Cheers.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was excellent. Thank you.